We go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my great pleasure to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you today with my talented colleague, Amanda Capps. We're going to talk about finishing your year with a flourish. And so we need to define that for you, and we'll do that in our conversation today. Amanda, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we'll get to the meat of our adventure. So
Sounds good. Thank you. So I am Amanda Capps. I am a second generation homeschooler. So I was homeschooled all the way through and am currently homeschooling my own brood, of which there are 8. And my oldest has graduated, and I have 7 coming up right behind her. And I have worked for Demme Learning for the last 12 years. Most of my tenure here has been in customer service. So you may or may not have talked to me at one time or another. But I enjoy supporting our customers and encouraging other homeschoolers in their journey.
absolutely. And if you looked at the registration, it also said that our talented colleague Sue Wachter would be with us today. But Sue is winging her way to Alaska as we speak today, going to be at all the Alaska homeschool conferences that'll happen in the next 8 days. And I'm only just a little bit jealous that I'm not with her, but she's going to be able to bless those families out there tremendously. So today, she collaborated with us on her thoughts, and we'll be sharing those with you today as well. So what we want to get started with is talking about being able to recognize the benefit in looking back at what you accomplished. And what I want to encourage you to do is to take a notebook and sit down with a piece of paper and a cup of tea, write out the good things that have happened. It's so hard for us to remember the good stuff. It's really easy to remember the bad stuff because that becomes chemically connected. You know, where it was stressful, we can remember. Evaluating now, take a little bit of time, take a notebook and write down what are the good things that have happened so far this year. Did you teach someone to read? Did you figure out a curriculum that wasn't working and you needed to change? Did you find a new routine? And I think it's always important to recognize that routines are for a season. They're not for a forever. And to give yourself a routine doesn't work anymore. It might just be time to move on. The next thing we want to talk about is what needs work. What do you need to write down on that piece of paper that still needs to get accomplished this year? And Sue said, look for gaps from previous concepts that may need to be filled in, and take the last 6 to 8 weeks here and fill those gaps. That would be a better use of your time than launching into something new or even changing curricula. The third thing that Sue wanted us to remind you of is public schools don't finish books every year. And getting stressed out about finishing just equals stress. It doesn't do anybody good. As my mom used to say, it's kind of like trying to teach a pig to sing. It frustrates both you and the pig. So don't shut down the learning process. Recognize that quality is better than quantity. And just because you don't finish doesn't mean it wasn't a terrific year. The other thing we talked about is be excited about the fact that there is an end game in process. You have an ending coming, so be able to find that ending. Now, I'm going to launch in with Amanda because she had some brilliant ideas, and she has what she calls littles, middles, and high schoolers. And so we're going to talk about what can you do in the next 6 to 7 weeks with each one of those groups to feel like you've accomplished something. So Amanda, let's start with the littles. Talk to me about what we talked about earlier when we planned this session about what are you looking for?
Absolutely. So, I mean, littles are so much fun. And I think sometimes we as parents realize, okay, this is kind of the foundation where, we've got to set a foundation. We've got to, have them figure out what school is, and we need to accomplish certain things. And while that is true, I have always been a proponent of better late than early. letting them really be developmentally ready. And that varies based on your child. I mean, there are some kids who are self-teaching themselves to read at 4, and there are kids who will not crack a book until they are 9 and successfully read something. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with either scenario. It doesn't necessarily make the 4-year-old a genius, and it doesn't necessarily make the 9-year-old lacking in some way. And so being able to keep that in mind. So while we want to look at, yes, can we go ahead and start really looking for teaching phonics, setting that foundation for a good reader, motor skills, forming our letters correctly, learning how to confidently count, write, and recognize our numbers. Anything you can set to music, little kids just soak up like a sponge. I have way too many songs in my head sometimes. And we recently had a situation where our TV got broken. And I was so not sad to miss out on a week, an entire week of not listening to Cocomelon or Listener Kids or some of the things that, my little ones like on repeat, because heaven knows kids love things in repetition, which is why reading to them and immersing them in language and teaching them good vocabulary is such a great time, because they're developing language and ideas and thoughts and learning how to put those things together. And I mean, just being able to have dad come in the door at the end of the day and say, you have your child be able to say, we went to the park, we saw monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies are migratory and they come from South America. Like just little facts. I mean, and that can all just be in a simple, let's sit down and read a book about butterflies together on the couch, and it can take 10 minutes, literally.
That's a terrific idea. And now I want you to talk about counting things you do for school. This is the perfect segue because we've had this conversation before. And I think sometimes as homeschool parents, we think the only academics that count are the ones that have a book in front of us. And that's not the truth.
This is where, being a second generation homeschooler, I have a little bit of an unfair advantage because I am not operating under that system of this is what a school day looks like, hour chunks of time, 8-hour day, lunch break, PE, all the different subjects. I was never put in that environment, for which I am truly grateful. And so that gives me a lot more outside of the box thinking and ideas to bring to my own children's educational experience and to draw from myself. So that being said, it's wonderful to be able to look for maybe the non-generic ways that we learn. If we're cooking in the kitchen, if we are using measuring cups, which, by the way, are fractions, just throwing that out there, but a lot of times parents don't make that connection. In our family, I can never just take a recipe and use a recipe. There are 10 of us in this house, and so I'm always going to either double, triple, sometimes even quadruple that recipe. My daughter learned the hard way. We don't triple salt in a recipe. We just don't necessarily need to add that much salt, and it can absolutely affect your outcome. That was a great cooking, math, and science, connection to make. I mean, all of it. Yes. So, I mean, be creative in how you look for just the everyday tasks of getting things done, like the cooking, like the cleaning, like budgeting, like grocery shopping. All of those things can be turned into absolutely legitimate subject matter that can be cataloged and counted as your time for school. And you're not doing anything, wrong by doing that.
Amanda, let's talk a little bit about if I'm the parent of a little and I want to evaluate what has gone well this year. What would you do as far as the notebook is concerned? You would write down the child's name and you would look for the things you've accomplished. One of those things that you mentioned yesterday was tying shoes. Can you bring that analogy back in?
Absolutely. Tying shoes in today's, world, I mean, and I probably, stick with Velcro and slip-ons longer than most just because of the volume of small people that I have to get ready and get out of the house. My youngest three are 5, 3, and 1 right now. So, I mean, it's intense. And I might actually be out of diapers by this summer, which is just the strangest prospect after 20 years. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not at least remotely excited about that. But back to tying shoes, that is a motor skill. That is a fine motor skill. And so sometimes I use children who are already accomplished at that skill to kind of guide and help other children. And let me just tell you right now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that either. If you have children who have good personality that complement each other and they work well together, which some of mine do, and some of mine it would be World War III and it wouldn't be worth the refereeing to put them together at the same time, at the same table, in the same room, other than maybe for all eating together. Definitely look for ways to free yourself up to where you can get everything done. Don't put yourself in the mindset that you are the only person or the end all be all for their education. I have people that come and help me with certain subjects, my mom being one of them. Um, Tutors are available. So if you don't feel comfortable or confident in a subject that you are teaching, look out in your community, look in your homeschool group. There may be a mom who's willing to just tuck your kid in with hers and do the same thing, and it's her jam, and then everybody's happy, and maybe you can return the favor with a different subject with one of her kids. I mean, there is so much out there opportunity wise for networking and making sure it's all getting done, but it doesn't all have to fall on you.
Absolutely. And so when you're evaluating those kids, I think it's also really important to recognize that give yourself grace in the evaluation process. You're
Amen.
not only educating them, but you're parenting them. And that is a huge endeavor. The important thing to remember here is when you have littles, middles, and biggies, the biggies are the ones that you have to be most accountable for. And so we had lots of observations about the middles and the biggies, and I'm going to take that up in just a minute. But I want to go back to a suggestion that Sue made, and that is have your own roundtable. Sit down and have a discussion with yourself, again, with your favorite beverage, about what things worked, what you learned, and what really wasn't as successful as you wanted it to be. Sue said what fell flat, and I think that's really a true statement. What she wanted us to encourage you is to be excited about all three because you have greater knowledge now than you had when you began. And knowledge is always powerful in knowing. We know more at the end of an academic year of how our kids learn, what works, what doesn't work, what we're not going to do again. And all those things are really important. And if you have middles and biggies, Sue suggested that you sit down with them and let them do a performance evaluation on themselves and on you and on their homeschool experience, because they'll have insights you lack. And being able to share your enthusiasm about the fact that you're coming to the end of the year and let's look at the cup is half full and what we've accomplished is a terrific way to teach your kids to begin the process of positive, affirming self-evaluation. And isn't that part of being a good parent? We want our kids to see the cup as half full. Let's go back now, Amanda, and talk about middles, about how do you evaluate middles? I'm saving the biggies for last because I think that probably is the most important thing as far as evaluating where you are and what you have left to the end of the year. So let's talk a little bit now about those middles and what can we do in the last 6-7 weeks to make their adventures profitable.
So middles are fun because sometimes they squeak under the radar because they get lost in the middle. That's like literally a thing. You've got the baby pictures of the firstborn, you've got the baby pictures of the baby, but where are these middle kids? Yet, this is such a crucial time in their development. Hopefully by this point, they are fluent readers. If they are not, we need to take a look at that and we need to figure out why. And we may need to employ some remediation or some tutoring or some vision therapy or, investigate why maybe reading isn't easy for them. But again, even if that's the case, no need to panic. You can almost get any book on audio. And so typically, even if there is a visual something going on or a delay or whatever it is, they can listen and comprehend at a much higher level than they can read anyway. So don't be afraid to utilize those kinds of tools, or to augment, a lot of reading with doing some physical reading and some audio. Um, there are so many great things out there as far as documentaries and things that we can watch. It doesn't always have to come from a book. And especially for those of us who have different learners or children that struggle with attention or dyslexia or whatever, term you want to put on that, they're bringing some challenges to the table, and we can look for ways to support, encourage, and help them feel successful too. The other thing at this point, we should be really solid on our addition, subtraction, our multiplication, and division. This is typically a kiddo that's getting ready to launch into fractions, and things are going to start getting a little more complicated. The other fun thing about this stage is there's not always just one way to get a right answer when it comes to math, and that can throw both students and parents for a loop because maybe your child isn't wired the same way that you are. They're not learning a concept the same way that you did. So again, it's a great opportunity for evaluating and observing. I think if there was one word that I could sum up, whether I know a person is a good parent or not, it's how good of an observer are they? Are they really plugged into what's going on with each kid? And I know that that can be challenging and it can feel overwhelming the more children that you have. But developing good observational skills, if you're not going to rely on your memory, which at this point, being 40 and having 8 kids is a really bad idea for me. I am definitely keeping a running dialogue or jotting notes. When they say the cute phrase, when you have the cute experience, write it down so that you have kind of a reel that kind of lets you know, okay, hey, maybe we had, a disastrous day here. Maybe the week-long stomach flu that took a month to go through the house was really a bummer this year. But the majority of the things that we are envisioning for our year are positive. And there's a lot of cute things that we can remember and we can focus on, to kind of counteract any sort of negative experiences.
So we talked about three things that we felt like middle schoolers probably their attentions on in these last several weeks of school. And that was mathematics, that was reading. And then the third thing was you had a great observation about spelling yesterday. So do you want to make that observation for our audience?
Absolutely. So this is really the time frame where kids are building their greatest amount of vocabulary. They are really getting they're in that word extension phase of spelling, which is, we're really reading higher level literature. It's important to make sure that we are expressing, retaining, processing, taking information in, and then we can turn around and intelligently communicate with another person. This is what I learned. This is what was going on in this story. These were the ideas or the feelings that I had, and this is what was, going on. And if we can clearly communicate those thoughts, ideas, and express it well in the written, word, of course, spelling is a big part of that. So being a confident speller really does help when we approach, those writing things that, we need to be working towards, you know, developing a good foundation for those skills.
And one of the things I think that is important to recognize, if you have a middle schooler and you have begun the process of compositional writing, in other words, putting your thoughts on paper, this is a perfect time for you, as you engage in that roundtable with your student, to evaluate the writing. Take a look at what those compositions look like in September, in December, in January, and now what do they look like in April? It's a perfect time to be able to show your student that they have had progress. Now, toward that end, sometimes parents will say to me, the amount of paper is absolutely overwhelming. So one of the best tools that you have is this little thing. And what I tell time is you probably don't need to keep every physical piece of paper, but it would be to your great advantage to keep documentary evidence, particularly of your students' compositional writing. So take a picture, put it in a folder, and then that gives you the best way to show your student, even if they're giving you pushback about composition, how their writing has evolved over the year. And that is a huge encouragement. And sometimes we forget, as parents, we pray for encouragement for ourselves, we pray for encouragement for our kids, but we forget how to quantify that encouragement, and being able to look at a progress from compositional writing from September to now is a huge way to do that. Now let's turn our attention, Amanda, to the big guns, and that's the high schoolers, because this is where you have only a little bit of time left, so you really have to be intentional about your evaluation of progress. So let's talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Absolutely. So you do not want to wait until they are a senior to think about transcripts. That is a horrible, horrible idea because what you will find is it's very difficult to remember all of the little details. And when I was going through the college application process with my daughter, it was very enlightening to me, having not come from a traditional school environment. In high school, you have what you call a guidance counselor, and a guidance counselor is doing multiple things. They are looking at what the student's strengths are, they are looking at what academically are their strengths. Because sometimes we can have skill sets and strengths in one area, but it's not necessarily reflected on a grade point average. So you've got to be able to look at both and go, okay, is there a disconnect? What's going on here? So that paints a very good picture. We need to talk with the student and get an idea of what do they want to do? Some kids know at a very young age that they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a police officer or a firefighter. And that is their all consuming thing. And it is the theme for everything in their lives. And other kids just kind of bump along and it changes frequently. And one day it may be an astronaut, and the next day it may be a scientist, and the next day they just want to be a mommy. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with, kind of ping ponging back and forth because you've got time, right? The decision doesn't have to be made today. But as we approach those last 4 years of formal education in the form of high school, we need to kind of start having those discussions of where do you see yourself? What do you want to do? Do you want to work a job? Do you want to be entrepreneurial? Do you have a certain idea about what you want your future to look like? And then we can kind of come alongside the academics and help guide them um, into making choices that are going to be the best for those decisions.
I think one of the things that's really important with your high schoolers is to take a look now at the academics and where do you have to go. Bear in mind, as Sue and Amanda and I have all said, high schools don't finish the textbook. What you need to know is that you've had evidence of educational progress and that you have documentary evidence of that progress through grades. And let me give a quick shout out to Ann Caraco, who has a website called It's Not That Hard to Homeschool. If you're looking for how do I build a transcript, what kind of information do I need, what do I need to create, Annie's got some terrific information in the form of books on her website. Go ahead and take a look at that. I'll have the website in the show notes for you when you review that, and I think you'll find that to be tremendously beneficial.
This
Let
is
me
also a
also
good
say-
time. Oops, sorry.
No,
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
this is also a great time to bring up HSLDA too, because they have a state presence. There are some states that have a state organization that keeps up with the laws and the requirements. In my situation, I happen to live in the state of Arkansas. And so with my daughter, the Education Alliance is one of the organizations. They put on 2 graduations for homeschoolers a year, one in the central part of the state and one in the northwest part of the state. And You submit all of your grade point averages, your hours, and your subjects, and they do your transcript. The diploma is signed by the governor. It's a wonderful ceremony, and that can be a great thing to get involved in if your state offers it. So be aware as you start getting into the high school years, be looking for those things. Reach out to HSLDA, look at what your state has to offer, look at what your state standards are, because again, the more information we have on the front end, the less panic we have on the back end.
That's a very true statement. The more information you have on the front end, the less panic you have on the back end. And that really is true. I have 5 homeschool graduates. I can tell you that each one of their journeys was entirely different. When my eldest daughter was looking at colleges, back now, according to my youngest, when rocks were soft, but when she was looking at colleges, there was no way to identify when she took the SAT that she was homeschooled. There wasn't even a code to say, this is a homeschool student taking an SAT. By the time kid number 4 was ready to do that 6 years later, not only was there a code, but we were buried under the plethora of mail, emails, content that arrived at our house because she was a homeschooler. So if you are a parent with a middle and you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure I can do this high school thing, let us encourage you that not only can you do it, but you can do it extraordinarily well, and it will make a tremendous difference for you. We're right at the bottom of the hour, Amanda, and I want to turn my attention to some of the questions that have been asked, but I think it's also important for us to talk about there's no such thing as a lost cause. So can you illustrate that for our families?
So being in customer service, trust me, I get plenty of calls that, I can only describe as someone in panic mode. It does happen. You do get to 8th grade and you find out your kid's on a 3rd grade reading level, or, somewhere something has fallen through the cracks and the system, and they've been pushed along and passed, and you think everything's hunky dory and fine. And then the straw that breaks the camel's back happens. You bring that child home and you are in full on panic mode because you feel like you have to make up 8 years in a year. And while that is definitely, panicky, it's not the end all be all. You can be so effective with your time. What I encourage those parents right off the bat is we need to figure out where we are. So if you haven't been super involved in their educational experience up to this point, this is where we need to have a phone consultation with a placement specialist, talk through what do we know, what are we solid on. That's the very first thing, because right then, right now, that's going to help alleviate some panic. Because like if we've got addition and subtraction down cold, if we are, reading at a 3rd to 5th grade level, all the other stuff can be, caught up. What we need to figure out is where are the gaps, address the gaps, and then move forward. And so you really would be amazed what you can do in 4 to 5 years, even if there's been several years of just subpar, passing along, or even say you have been a homeschooler your entire journey and life has just happened. There's been job loss, there has been a death in the family, something, a child has had a cancer diagnosis. I mean, anything that takes, multiple babies, entering the mix. All of those things can cause disruptions, can cause there to be, a break taken where maybe it wasn't the best timing or the most opportune for that child. All of it's recoverable. I cannot tell you the number of success stories, the number of, talking somebody off the ledge, holding somebody's hand for a little while, and just pouring some encouragement into what really boils down to guilt. You're just dying under the level of guilt that you're putting on yourself, and you don't have to. You don't have to take that on. You don't have to pick it up. You don't have to carry it. So just that would be my biggest encouragement right there is, just keep your head clear, give yourself grace, give your student grace, and figure out what really has to be remediated and what has to be done, and let's get going.
I think it's important to recognize that guilt is a spiritual gift from the opposition. So
Amen.
if we refuse to accept guilt, now there's a difference between being accountable to knowing that we have to educate a child and just giving self a frank pass, or looking with both eyes and eyelids at what has occurred and finding the things that have occurred affirmatively, and then maybe filling those gaps where they haven't occurred affirmatively. I want to tell you all a story. I want to go back to that analogy of sit down, have a roundtable with your particularly your biggies, your high schoolers. Heard a wonderful story. I had the opportunity to speak last night at a homeschool gathering here in my local community. After the gathering was over, as homeschool moms will do, we're all standing around having a conversation. And I heard this absolutely amazing story, which I want to share with you guys because I think this is such a brilliant idea. This family had a young lady I spoke at her graduation last spring. So she's a college freshman this year. And she knew she wanted to go to college, but she wasn't sure what she wanted her college experience to be. So what her parents suggested to her is that she go around to people in the community who had known her, people in her church community, people in their social circle, and ask them what they thought her strengths were. And she got a lot of really fascinating, cogent feedback. So in this particular instance, she was allowing her community and her circle of influence to be her guidance counselor, to guide her toward what do you do well and what might be a terrific endeavor for you. This young lady is now a communications major at a college in South Carolina, doing extraordinarily well. And it was just a brilliant maneuver on the part of her parents to help her how she had strengths. Because there's something entirely different when Amanda and I tell our children what their strengths are, and when the lady who's known you in church choir for 10 years tells you what your strengths are. And I think that's just a brilliant, extraordinary example of how we can help facilitate our kids in planning their future and incorporating our tribe into helping. Let's turn our attention now, Amanda, to some of these questions, because we had some good ones this time, and I want to make sure that we don't leave them unattended. One of the things that a parent said is new to homeschooling, looking to get ideas and directions to try. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about is after you take the notebook and you write down the notes and you have the roundtable with your kids, then what do you do? And I think one thing that we can talk about is how do you celebrate the end of the year? And so, Amanda, I know that you've done some terrific celebrations in the past. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So obviously, if we're nearing a school year end, the weather is warming up, kids are getting antsy. It is harder to get kids to focus because outside is starting to look very alluring. I mean, it's not so much of a fight when there's, 3 feet of snow on the ground and it's miserably cold and nobody, wants to be out of their pajamas and, away from, the wood stove. But as the weather progresses, as things get warmer, this is a great opportunity. One, to celebrate the season and bring in, new life is happening everywhere. Birth is happening everywhere. There are baby cows, baby rabbits, baby deer. Everything is new life. So that is a great time to kind of talk about, okay, this is the time of renewal. So take the stuff outside, sit at the picnic table, go to the park. Look for ways to celebrate and enjoy the sunshine and the good weather. And it's a great day to plan group activities and doing things with other homeschoolers because they're itching to get out and do some things too. Nature walks, nature notebooks, art opportunities. The list is endless, but I know you will be able to know. And again, this is where these observation skills come in. You know what just thrills your kids to no end. So, if that's, for my for my 3-year-old, it doesn't get any better than the trampoline park. So we might have a, homeschool meetup at the trampoline park and I can count that as PE and the toddlers are going to nap really well and I'm going to be able to get a lot accomplished that afternoon with my older kids. That is totally okay. That is totally a thing. You also have the benefit of, spring break has happened. I like to pick and do spring break not when the others are, because it gives us the ability to not have long lines, not be competing with other, crowds, to do the things that we would like to do. It's a great time to go to the zoo. The zoo has tons of babies. You can do an animal unit. There's, like I said, the list is endless, but pick things that are really going to bless your kids, that are going to encourage them. And ultimately, if we want to establish lifelong learners, if we want to establish that curiosity, that hunger for knowledge, we want to make it fun. We want to make it interesting. It doesn't always have to be a workbook. It doesn't always have to be sitting at a table, reciting your times tables in perfect unison. I mean, I always just think of like the Sound of Music and the whistles and like that is not the goal. And the reality is it's not reality. I mean, we perfect example. We are having windows replaced at our house. One of the things that had to be done was we had to remove a certain section of brick where a door is going to replace a window in our home. In the process of doing that, we went and unearthed our scaffolding from the shed and we disturbed a baby squirrel nest. 3 baby squirrels suddenly have no mama. And so this immediately sends us all into what are we going to do? We have to save the baby squirrels, right? And so we're researching about baby squirrels and what they eat, and based on what they look like in the developmental cycle, how old they are and what their needs are. And we found a cousin who has raised baby squirrels before, and she gave us a whole bunch of information and told us what to go get. And so, anyway, I'm just saying something that was completely unplanned. Nothing that like, oh, I want to do a squirrel unit today. I mean, like that did not even cross my mind. I was just like, my father-in-law needs scaffolding to do this job for us, and he's helping us out, and this is the focus, and this is what we're doing. And I'm trying to herd children who are running around like, cats with their tails on fire because they want to be involved in every little thing. And suddenly we have 3 baby squirrels. So, I'm just telling you, roll with it. Embrace the learning where it's happening and don't fight it. I mean, I could have been like, "Oh, this is just great. This is just ruins our day. This completely derails our, academic day." No, why? Seize the opportunity that presents itself and go with it. And we learned a lot about squirrels.
I remember well finding a baby box turtle. We've raised 6 or 7 squirrels in our family over the years. One of my children was absolutely all things furry, all things fuzzy, all things that creeped and crawled. She brought them home. We raised 2 baby robins that fell out of nests. And you just don't know where a child is going to end up. That child's now a research biologist. So I think we have to look for those serendipities and encourage us to just continue to find those things. I'm looking through all of the questions that you all ask, and every single one of you, in some way, shape, or form, said, "I need some encouragement." And I have to tell you that taking a pause, taking a break, and figuring out what that looks like is different for each one of you, but absolutely necessary. And frankly, you are giving out of yourself as a parent, as an educator, every single day. So now it's time for you to have the opportunity to figure out, where have I done a really good job? What have we learned to do this year? And like Amanda has said, maybe it's we've learned to work cooperatively to clean up the kitchen together. Maybe it's something that simple. Maybe it's that we have learned so much about World War II that now we have 4 kids who can wax eloquent about the comparisons between World War II and the present crisis that's going on in Ukraine. Who knows? For you, it'll be different than it is for Amanda, than it was for me. Every homeschool family is different. But I think one of the things we want to both encourage you is to recognize that you have accomplished extraordinary things. I don't care if you've gotten 2 days of school done this year because there was a health crisis and a move and a new baby and all those things. You have made accomplishments. So take some time to pause and reflect and document those accomplishments so that your quiver can be refilled. Amanda, one of the things that people talked about is feeling energized to finish the year. And I have 11 people who said something along those lines. Can you talk a little bit about nourishing the nourisher and what do you do to refill your cup in the midst of educating 8 kids?
Oh, I think it's so important to plug into our network and our support system. I'm very grateful and very thankful that I have the full support of a grandmother, my parents who are their grandparents, so a great grandmother, grandparents on both sides, both my husband's parents and my parents are very supportive. I have a wonderful community of homeschool friends. Um, there is a mom's meetup once a month, that one of those ladies hosts. And it is I remember still the first time I went. And of course, things try to come up. I mean, I think I was invited maybe 3 months before I was able to actually make an appearance. Um, and I just remember getting home. And I mean, I knew I was going to be tired the next day because I got home late. I mean, because when you get a bunch of women together who all homeschool and homestead and are crunchy mamas, I mean, it's just you know, it goes late. And I remember telling my husband, I have found my tribe. Like, I have never felt more comfortable, more accepted, more seen in a group of women in my life. That is invaluable. If you have that experience, you hang on to those people. Those are your people. They are the ones that are going to, show up and help you fold laundry and that are going to walk in and say, come on, everybody, we're going to read this book out loud. And they're going to understand that, you've had a rough day, that, you've nursed and spent more time awake than you were asleep. They get it. And they're right there in the trenches, right alongside you. And, they're your biggest form of encouragement. I try to get together and have a dinner occasionally with a friend and just recap what's going on in our lives and see if they have any insights. I was sharing some struggles of just feeling like, my oldest daughter is kind of floundering and she was like, "Oh, she's got a good foundation. You've put all the right things in. She's going to circle back around. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great." And I cannot tell you how much better I felt after that 5-minute conversation over a hamburger with my friend that I was able to, squeak out for an evening. Those situations and those experiences are invaluable, and it is so important that you give yourself permission to network, to connect, to have that one evening where dad's handling dinner and you walk out the door and you drive somewhere by yourself and you spend a few hours with your people, and you don't have to think about kids and you don't have to think about bedtime routine and baths and all of that. It can recharge you for literally months.
I think one
For
of the
real.
things that's really important is I know we have a significant number of families who began their homeschooling journey with the advent of COVID. And so they have been isolated from. So, how do you find that tribe if you don't have one presently? So, I know that you've had a move in the last year, and with that comes all manner of adventure. But how did you find a tribe in your new city? So let's talk about
So, first of all, I knew a couple people over here, but I didn't get to spend a lot of time with them because of the geographical distance until we moved over this direction. So, once we got here, I was able to spend more time with them, and that kind of helped plug me in to what was going on locally, because we had some mutual acquaintances. The other thing is, Facebook has groups. There are local support groups. They have websites, they have social media platforms, they have Instagrams, there are so many things out there. But I can tell you for sure, if you show up at a park and there's another 2 or 3 families with a bunch of kids there, chances are they're homeschoolers. And if you walk up and introduce yourself, you're going to find that you immediately have some things in common. You immediately have some kids that are the same age. That happened to me just the other day. And I've been homeschooling for gosh, 17 years now. And we literally just happened to show up at the park. It was 1:30 in the afternoon, and there was this entire group of women, and they were all like, "Oh, are you meeting somebody?" I was like, "Yeah, actually, I met somebody on Facebook. I'm meeting up with them. They just moved here from Ohio. They have a son my son's age, and they're like, "Oh, we all homeschool. We do this once a month. You guys need to just start coming." And that was all there was to it. I mean, it literally happened that organically. And so those situations can happen all the time if you're looking for them. If you put word of mouth out, trust me, if your kids are out screaming in the front yard during school hours, you'll find the other homeschoolers on your street. It's bound to happen.
I listened last night to a panel discussion for new homeschool moms by veteran homeschool moms. And that was one of the things that was said is go to a park and your kids are better at making friends than you are. They don't have
Absolutely.
all the baggage you have. So let your kids carry the conversation and start that adventure. And I think that was a brilliant observation by a veteran homeschool mom is because we don't know where those friendships are actually going to begin. And frankly, I began homeschooling back in the day, and this was probably when you were a homeschooler, Amanda, that
Maybe.
you were out and about in the middle of the day and people made observations about why aren't you all in school? It was a field trip, you know, because you couldn't tell people what you were really up to. By the time we were close to ending our homeschool journey, it was a whole different world. And there were many more of us out there, and we were a force to be reckoned with. So I would encourage you, if you have experienced the isolation of homeschooling alone by yourself because of COVID, to now look for apps like Facebook, like Nextdoor, like your local community group. Go put a notice up on the community board at your community center and say, hey,
Or
I'm
your
doing a
library.
homeschool meetup first of the month. Go to the public library. You know what? I promise you, your librarian school families, and they can help connect you. There are as many ways to make connections as there are stars in the sky. You just have to figure out what those connections might be. So, Amanda, in this last 10 minutes, what would you say? You and I have different experiences because I had an end game every year and you homeschool year round. So, what would be your suggestions to bring an academic year to a conclusion and march into the next year when you're not really going to finish a year, but your year
Sure.
continues?
So first, let me give you just a little bit of background as to why we do that. Okay. So I work for Demme Learning. My husband is a firefighter, so he's a first responder. And so his shift is not your typical dad's, 9 to 5, 5 days a week kind of a thing. Um, and really, because of babies being born, kiddos with learning differences or learning challenges, I just very quickly, in that adage of being an observer, I noticed if we took too long of a break, we lost too much ground. Like we were backtracking too much. We were losing information that was there. And so what I have found and what seems to work the best for our family, and it doesn't have to be this way for you. I mean, you can do that's the beauty of homeschooling. There is so much flexibility. You can set up whatever schedule or calendar is going to work the best for you. But for us, even through the summer months, we continue on with math. We definitely do assigned reading. And, I may that's probably where I'm going to focus a little more on the extracurricular, like they may play a sport. We may do some specific field trips. We may do some specific traveling. We actually live about 2.5 hours from a place called Mansfield, Missouri. And that's a fantastic little day trip. And you can go see the home of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So there's all kinds of Laura Ingalls Wilder structures and some of her artwork and her books and her writing. And so we did a unit on her life over the summer, and we read some of the books. And so I'm just saying, you can really incorporate some things like that through the summer that keep learning light, they keep it fun, they keep it engaging, but you're still learning and you're still making forward progress and you're still getting things done. But maybe you're only doing uh, actual academics for an hour to 2 hours a day. It's always a great time to utilize it during nap time for your littles and in the heat of the day where they don't want to be outside melting anyway. We live in a southern state where there are just hours of the day that you just don't go outside or you're going to melt onto the pavement. So, you can absolutely, and in the winter, up north, your winters are longer, it's going to be cold longer. You can do the same thing. It doesn't have to follow a traditional school year or look like a traditional school calendar in order to be successful. And you have to go with what works for you and works for your students. And that has just been, what has worked really, really well and successfully for us.
Now, in my family, we had an end to the school year. I mean, we had a date circled on the calendar and more or less made that date. Sometimes we'd be a week or two behind, depending on what had happened that year, if a baby was born or something like that. But we did math year round and we did reading year round. And it didn't matter how old you were, there was 45 minutes to an hour in the afternoon where you had quiet time, where you got to take a book and go to a room and stay there. We wore out library cards, but I have to laugh. My 27-year-old daughter is living with us for a period of time. And we had a frightfully busy holiday weekend. And she turned to me Sunday afternoon and said, I need you to tell me to go take a nap. And I said, you're perfectly capable of doing that yourself. She said, no, I need a rest time and I need you to enforce it. And so my takeaway here is, as a parent, a busy parent who is probably doing multitasking out the bazoo, someone to tell you to go take a nap. And that is a perfectly acceptable response. And I want to make sure that you're able to do that. Now, we've talked about a whole lot of things today, and hopefully you're coming away with some ideas that will give you some encouragement. What we want you to do is to figure out in these last several weeks of school that your cup is half full. You've accomplished something extraordinary. You've done something that the masses don't do, which is you've taken control of your children's academic experience and you've given them opportunity. And we want to encourage you to do that throughout the year and to look back on your year in an affirmative way. There's lots of ways to do that. We've talked about the notebook. We've talked about the round table. We've talked about having some sort of end of year celebration, end of term celebration, end of the book celebration. I have to tell you, Easter Sunday, we were sitting around, we were talking about the end of the school year because I knew this roundtable was coming up. And my 23-year-old son, his birthday was yesterday. He said, the best end of year celebration I ever had was the year I got to burn the geography book. I absolutely hated. And I looked at him and I was like, you did? He said, yeah, Mom, you told me if I could finish it, we would have a bonfire and I would get to burn it. I'd completely forgotten that. But he remembered. And I think that was really funny. Amanda, we're at the top of the hour. What closing thoughts do you have for our parents?
So the word that keeps really just ruminating in my mind is investment. When we choose to school our children at home, we are making the choice to have a long-term investment. There will be some quick gains. There will be some things that happen very quickly. But if I could encourage you over anything at all, it's that it's a long-term investment. You're not going to see the real interest, the real fruit of this investment until we get to the end of the journey. And even then, sometimes as we launch young adults, it can have fits and spurts, and you can kind of pull your hair out and go, oh my goodness, what are we doing? What is happening right now? But it is an investment, and you are investing of your time, your talent, and your treasure into these kids. And that is such an incredible, valuable thing. And no one is going to do that job as well as you can. And so that is the, encouragement that I would leave you with today is just you are investing in incredible people with incredible futures and their whole lives ahead of them.
I think those are good words to leave you with today. Thank you all for trusting us with your time. Thank you for joining us in this endeavor. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.